Welcome to Every Storytelling. How are you doing today? We are going to be reading a story, but first up we are going to be reading the Bible, then we are going to be doing the synopsis with Kimberly, then we are going to be reading the Fellowship of the Ring, then we are going to be finishing the book. No, we're not finishing the book. We are going to be turning off the live stream, but I hope you guys enjoy. Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the bell, never missing the video. Now, to make a dramatic exit.
What? JJ disappeared?
Wait.
He's back. No, I can't. I don't use rings of power. Scary. All right, so for real, however, we are going to be reading Luke chapter 23. So, this is from the English Standard Version of the Bible. Let me go ahead and get started. Then the whole company of them arose and brought him before Pilate, and they began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ a king." Sorry, I said it backwards. He himself is Christ a king. And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered him, "You have said so." Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, "I find no guilt in this man." But they were urgent, saying, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee even to this place." When Pilate heard this, he asked whether the man was a Galilean, and when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him over to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at that time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he had long desired to see him, because he had heard about him, and he was hoping to see some sign done by him. So he questioned him at some length, and he made no answer. The chief priests and the scribes stood by vehemently accusing him. And Herod with his soldiers treated him with contempt and mocked him. Then, arraying him in splendid clothing, he sent him back to Pilate. And Herod and Pilate became friends with each other that very day, for before this they had been at enmity with each other. Pilate then called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people, and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who was misleading the people. And after examining him before you, behold, I did not find this man guilty of any of your charges against him. Neither did Herod, for he sent him back to us. Look, nothing deserving death has been done by him. I will therefore punish and release him." But they all cried out together, "Away with this man, and release to us Barabbas," a man who had been thrown into prison for an insurrection started in the city and for murder. Pilate addressed them at once more, desiring to release Jesus, but they kept shouting, "Crucify! Crucify him!" A third time he said to them, "Why? What evil has he done? I have found in him no guilt deserving death. I will therefore punish him and release him." But they were urgent, demanding with loud cries that he should be crucified, and their voices prevailed. So Pilate decided that their demand should be granted. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, for whom they asked, but he delivered Jesus over to their will. And as they led him away, they seized one Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, and laid on him the cross to carry it behind Jesus. And there followed him a great multitude of the people and of women who were mourning and lamenting for him. But turning to them, Jesus said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming when they will say, 'Blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed.' Then they will begin to say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if they do these things when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry?" 2 others who were criminals were led away to be put to death with him. And when they came to the place that is called the Skull, there they crucified him, and the criminals, one on the right on his right, and one on his left. And Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they cast lots to divide his garments. And the people stood by watching, but the rulers scoffed at him, saying, He saved others, let him save himself, if he is the Christ of God, his chosen one. The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine, and saying, If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. There was also an inscription over him, This is the King of the Jews. One of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, saying, Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us. But the other rebuked him, saying, Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong. And he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And he said to him, Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. It was now about the 6th hour, and there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour, while the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Then Jesus, calling out with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And having said this, he breathed his last. Now when the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God, saying, Certainly this man was innocent. And all the crowds that had assembled for this spectacle, when they saw what had taken place, returned home beating their breasts, and all his acquaintances and the women who had followed him from Galilee stood at a distance watching these things. Now there was a man named Joseph from the Jewish town of Arimathea. He was a member of the council, a good and righteous man who had not consented to their decision and action, and he was looking for the kingdom of God. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then he took it down and wrapped it in a linen shroud and laid him in a tomb cut in stone where no one had ever yet been laid. It was the day of preparation, and the Sabbath was beginning. The women who had come with him from Galilee followed and saw the tomb and how his body was laid. Then they returned and prepared spices and ointments. On the Sabbath day they rested according to the commandment. That's the end of the chapter. And we will have to finish the book of Luke tomorrow when we are able to read again. So, in the last chapter, Frodo waited until his birthday, and then him and Sam, they were kind of sitting around a campfire, and then all of a sudden Gandalf just showed up, and he said, he had a magic wand, and he said, maybe Expecto Patronum or something. I don't know exactly what he said. It's probably something in Latin. And then all of a sudden they whisked away, and they wound up, and they were at Mount Doom. And Frodo said, "Oh, this is the place right here." He took the ring off of the necklace and threw it into the mountain. End of the story.
Now it's time for the true synopsis.
Here comes Kim to say how it really happened.
Okay, it's Kim's turn. Go.
That is. So what actually happened was, I was in my room last night, and I'm not sure if I heard everything, but they did go out, and they were at a campfire and everything, and they actually were.
They had a campfire?
Yeah.
Oh, they were, weren't they?
And
Oh, and don't forget about their tents that you could just roll up in a blanket, and then they could transform into hotels. Don't forget about those.
Okay. Not the
JJ.
We've already done the fake synopsis.
sorry, then what happened was, I'm not sure if Gandalf showed up or at all, but I don't think so. But basically they traveled
Who's with him?
Sam
Who else?
and Mary.
It's either Mary or Pippin. I think it's Pippin.
Yeah, I think it is. It might be Mary though.
And the other one is in Buckleberry, waiting.
Right. So basically, what happened was he sold Bag End. I know it's crazy. He sold Bag End, and he went on Bilbo's birthday and his birthday, and he's supposed to be moving, but he's using this as an excuse to get a head start on his journey before anybody realizes that he's gone. That way, when the bad guys eventually do realize, because like they're probably monitoring the Shire at least a little bit, and when they eventually do realize that he isn't where he moved to, he's gonna be pretty far away by then.
Who did they overhear having an unusual conversation?
It was Sam's dad.
Sam's dad, the gaffer.
Yeah. And I'm kind of sure it was with I think my personal theory is that it was with Gollum, but I highly doubt that.
I think it was with one of the Nazgul. Remember the 9?
Right, the ring wraiths.
Ring wraiths.
I was
Yeah,
thinking maybe
that
it
could
was with
possibly.
Gandalf or an elf.
No, not with Gandalf. Gandalf would just go up to them and say, "Hey."
Yeah, not Gandalf. And I doubt an elf because he doesn't know very many elves. And those that he does, he doesn't know well.
All right. So
It's time to read more book.
we are going to finish this chapter. It is called Three is Company. And let me begin. The morning came, pale and clammy. Frodo woke up first and found that a tree root had made a hole in his back and that his neck was stiff. Oh, something that we forgot to mention is that Frodo is not really feeling like he's in shape right now, and they're kind of making fun of him a little bit for it. And also, it was Pippin that was with them. So, all right. Walking for pleasure, why didn't I drive, he thought, as he usually did at the beginning of an expedition, and all my beautiful feather beds are sold to the Sackville Bagginses. These tree roots would do them good. He stretched. Wake up, hobbits, he cried. It's a beautiful morning. What's beautiful about it? Said Pippin, peering over the edge of his blanket with one eye. Sam, get breakfast ready for 9:30. Have you got the bathwater hot? Sam jumped up, looking rather bleary. No, sir, I haven't, sir, he said. Frodo stripped the blankets from Pippin and rolled him over, then walked off to the edge of the wood. Away eastward the sun was rising, red out of the mist that lay thick on the world. Touched with gold and red, and autumn trees seemed to be sailing rootless in a shadowy sea. A little below him, to the left, the road ran down steeply into a hollow and disappeared. When they returned, Sam and Pippin had got a good fire going. Water! Shouted Pippin. Where's the water? I don't keep water in my pockets, said Frodo. We thought you had gone to find some, said Pippin, busy setting out the food and cups. You had better go now. You can come too, said Frodo, and bring all the water bottles. There was a stream at the foot of the hill. They filled their bottles and the small camping kettle at a little fall where the water fell a few feet over an outcrop of gray stone. It was icy cold, and they spluttered and puffed as they bathed their faces and hands. When their breakfast was over, and their packs all trussed up again, it was after 10 o'clock, and the day was beginning to turn fine and hot. They went down the slope and across the stream where it dived under the road, and up the next slope, and up and down another shoulder of the hills, and by that time their cloaks, blankets, water, food, and other gear already seemed a heavy burden. The day's march promised to be warm and tiring work. After some miles, however, the road ceased to roll up and down. It climbed to the top of a steep bank in a weary, zigzagging sort of way, and then prepared to go down for the last time. In front of them they saw the lower lands dotted with small clumps of trees that melted away in the distance to a brown woodland haze. They were looking across the woody end toward the Brandywine River. The road wound away before them like a piece of string. "The road goes on forever," said Pippin, "but I can't without a rest. It is high time for lunch." He sat down on the bank at the side of a road and looked away east into the haze, beyond which lay the river and the end of the shire in which he had spent all his life. Sam stood by him. His round eyes were wide open, for he was looking across lands he had never seen to a new horizon. "Do elves live in those woods?" he asked. "Not that I have ever heard of," said Pippin. Frodo was silent. He, too, was gazing eastward along the road, as if he had never seen it before. Suddenly he spoke aloud, but as to himself, saying, "The road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road has gone, and I must follow if I can, pursuing it with weary feet until it joins some larger way, where many paths and errands meet, and whither then I cannot say." "That sounds like a bit of old Bilbo rhyming," said Pippin. "Or is it one of your imitations? It does not sound altogether encouraging." "I don't know," said Frodo. "It came to me then, as if I was making it up, but I may have heard it long ago. Certainly it reminds me very much of Bilbo in the last years before he went away. He used often to say there was only one road, that it was like a great river. Its springs were at every doorstep, and every path was its tributary. It's a dangerous business, Frodo, going out of your door. Let me do that one again. "It's a dangerous business, Frodo, going out of your door," he used to say. "You step into the road, and if you don't keep your feet, there is no knowing where you might be swept off to. Do you realize that this is the very path that goes through Mirkwood, and that if you let it, it might take you to the Lonely Mountain, or even further, and to worse places?" He used to say that on the path outside the front door at Bag End, especially after he had been out for a long walk. "Well, the road won't sweep me anywhere for an hour at least," said Pippin, unslinging his pack. The others followed his example, putting their packs against the bank, and their legs out into the road. After a rest, they had a good lunch, and then more rest. The sun was beginning to get low, and the light of afternoon was on the land as they went down the hill. So far they had not met a soul on the road. This way was not much used, being hardly fit for carts, and there was little traffic to the woody end. They had been jogging along again for an hour or more when Sam stopped a moment as if listening. They were now on level ground, and the road, after much winding, lay straight ahead through grassland sprinkled with tall trees, outliers of the approaching woods. "I can hear a pony or a horse coming along the road behind," said Sam. They looked back, but the turn of the road prevented them from seeing far. "I wonder if that is Gandalf coming after us," said Frodo, but even as he said it he had a feeling that it was not so, and a sudden desire to hide from the view of the rider came over him. "It may not matter much," he said apologetically, "but I would rather not be seen on the road by anyone. I am sick of my doings being noticed and discussed. And if it is Gandalf," he added as an afterthought, "we can give him a little surprise, to pay him for being so late. Let's get out of sight." The other two ran quickly to the left and down into a little hollow not far from the road. There they lay flat. Frodo hesitated for a second. Curiosity or some other feeling was struggling with his desire to hide. The sound of hoofs drew nearer. Just in time he threw himself down in a patch of long grass behind a tree that overshadowed the road. Then he lifted his head and peered cautiously above one of the great roots. Round the corner came a black horse, no hobbit pony, but a full-sized horse, and on it sat a large man who seemed to crouch in the saddle, wrapped in a great black cloak and hood, so that only his boots in the high stirrups showed below. His face was shadowed and invisible. When it reached the tree and was level with Frodo, the horse stopped. The riding figure sat quite still with its head bowed as if listening. From inside the hood came a noise as if someone sniffling to catch an elusive scent. The head turned from side to side of the road. A sudden unreasoning fear of discovery laid hold of Frodo, and he thought of his ring. He hardly dared to breathe, and yet the desire to get it out of his pocket became so strong that he began slowly to move his hand. He felt that he had only to slip it on, and then he would be safe. The advice of Gandalf seemed absurd. Bilbo had used the ring, and I am still in the Shire, he thought, as his hand touched the chain on which it hung. At that moment the rider sat up and shook the reins. The horse stepped forward, walking slowly at first, and then breaking into a quick trot. Frodo crawled to the edge of the road and watched the rider until he dwindled into the distance. He could not be quite sure, but it seemed to him that suddenly, before it passed out of sight, the horse turned aside and went into the trees on the right. Well, I call that very queer and indeed disturbing, said Frodo to himself as he walked toward his companions. Pippin and Sam had remained flat in the grass and had seen nothing, so Frodo described the rider and his strange behavior. I can't say why, but I felt certain he was looking or smelling for me, and also I felt certain that I did not want him to discover me. I've never seen or felt anything like it in the Shire before. But what has one of the big people got to do with us, said Pippin, and what is he doing in this part of the world? There is some men about, said Frodo. Down in the South Farthing they have had trouble with big people, I believe, but I have never heard of anything like this rider. I wonder where he comes from. Begging your pardon, put in Sam suddenly, I know where he comes from. It's from Hobbiton that this here black rider comes, unless there's more than one, and I know where he's going to. What do you mean? Said Frodo sharply, looking at him in astonishment. Why didn't you speak up before? I have only just remembered, sir. It was like this. When I got back to our hole yesterday evening with the key, my dad, he says to me, "Hello, Sam," he says. "I thought you were away with Mr. Frodo this morning. There's been a strange customer asking for Mr. Baggins of Bag End, and he's only just gone. I've sent him on to Bucklebury. Not that I liked the sound of him. He seemed mighty put out when I told him Mr. Baggins had left his old home for good. Hissed at me, he did. It gave me quite a shudder. What sort of fellow was he? Says I to the gaffer. I don't know, says he. But he wasn't a hobbit. He was tall and black-like, and he stooped over me. I reckon it was one of the big folk from the foreign parts. He spoke funny." "The gaffer can't be blamed anyway," said Frodo. "As a matter of fact, I heard him talking to a stranger who seemed to be inquiring for me, and I nearly went and asked him who it was. I wish I had, or you had told me about it before. I might have been more careful on the road. Still, there may be no connection between this rider and the gaffer's stranger," said Pippin. "We left Hobbiton secretly enough, and I don't see how he could have followed us." "What about the smelling, sir?" said Sam. "And the gaffer said he was a black chap." "I wish I had waited for Gandalf," Frodo muttered, "but perhaps it would only have made matters worse." "Then you know or guess something about this rider," said Pippin, who had caught the muttered words. "I don't know, and I would rather not guess," said Frodo. "All right, then, Cousin Frodo. You can keep your secrets for the present, if you want to be mysterious. In the meanwhile, what are we to do? I should like a bite and a sup, but somehow I think we had better move out from here. Your talk of sniffing riders with invisible noses has unsettled me." "Yes, I think we will move on now," said Frodo, "but not on the road, in case that rider comes back, or another follows him. We ought to do good do a good step more today, Buckland is still miles away. The shadow of the trees were long and thin on the grass, and they started off again. They now kept a stone's throw to the left of the road, and kept out of sight of it much as they could, but this hindered them, for the grass was thick and tussocky, and the ground uneven, and the trees began to draw together into thickets. The sun had gone down red behind the hills at their backs, and evening was coming on before they came back to the road at the end of the long level over which it had run straight for some miles. At that point it bent left and went down into the lowlands of the Yale, making for Stock, but the lane branched right, winding through a wood of ancient oak trees on its way to Wood Hall. "That is the way for us," said Frodo. Not far from the road meeting, they came on the huge hulk of a tree. It was still alive and had leaves on the small branches that it had put out round the broken stumps of its long-fallen limbs, but it was hollow and could be entered by a great crack on the side away from the road. The hobbits crept inside and sat there upon a floor of old leaves and decayed wood. They rested and had a light meal, talking quietly and listening from time to time. Twilight was about them as they crept back to the lane. The west wind was sighing in the branches, leaves were whispering. Soon the road began to fall gently but steadily into the dusk. A star came out above the trees in the darkening east before them. They went abreast and in step to keep up their spirits. After a time, as the stars grew thicker and brighter, the feelings of disquiet left them, and they no longer listened to the sound of hoofs, or for the sound of hoofs. They began to hum softly, as hobbits have a way of doing as they walk along, especially when they are drawing near to a home at night. With most hobbits, it is a supper song or a bed song, but these hobbits hummed a walking song, though not, of course, without any mention of supper and bed. Bilbo Baggins had made the words, to a tune that was as old as the hills, and taught it to Frodo as they walked in the lanes of the Water Valley and talked about adventure. Upon the hearth the fire is red, beneath the roof there is a bed, but not yet weary are our feet, still round the corner we may meet a sudden tree or standing stone that none have seen but we alone. Tree and flower and leaf and grass, let them pass, let them pass. Hill and water under sky, pass them by, pass them by. Still round the corner there they wait, a new road or a secret gate, and though we pass them by today, tomorrow we may come this way, and take the hidden paths that run toward the moon or to the sun. Apple, thorn, and nut and sloe, let them go, let them go. Sand and stone and pool and dell, fare you well, fare you well. Home is behind, the world ahead, and there are many paths to tread, those shadows to the edge of night, until the stars are all alight. Then world behind and home ahead, we'll wander back to home and bed. Mist and twilight, cloud and shade, away shall fade, away shall fade. Fire and lamp and meat and bread, and then to bed, and then to bed. The song ended. "And now to bed, and now to bed," sang Pippin in a high voice. "Hush," said Frodo. "I think I hear hoofs again." They stopped suddenly and stood as silent as tree shadows, listening. There was a sound of hoofs in the lane some way behind, but coming slow and clear down the wind. Down the wind? Down the wind. 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 Wind.
Wind.
Quickly and quietly, go ahead and write which one you think it is in the comments, wind or wind. Just write the spelling, not the pronunciation, and we'll figure it out. Quickly and quietly they slipped off the path and ran into the deeper shade under the oak trees. "Don't let us go too far," said Frodo. "I don't want to be seen, but I want to see if it is another Black Rider." "Very well," said Pippin, "but don't forget the sniffing." The hoofs drew nearer. They had no time to find any hiding place better than a general darkness under the trees. Sam and Pippin crouched behind a large tree bole where Frodo crept back a few yards toward the lane. It showed gray and pale, a line of fading light through the wood. Above it the stars were thick in the dim sky, but there was no moon. The sound of hoofs stopped. As Frodo watched, he saw something dark pass across the lighter space between two trees and then halt. It looked like the black shade of a horse led by a smaller black shadow. The black shadow stood close to the point where they had left the path, and it swayed from side to side. Frodo thought he heard the sound of snuffling, sniffling, sniffing, sneezing, whatever. The shadow bent to the ground and then began to crawl toward him. Once more, the desire to slip on the ring came over Frodo, but this time it was stronger than before, so strong that almost before he realized what he was doing, his hand was groping in his pocket. But at that moment there came a sound like mingled song and laughter. Clear voices rose and fell in the starlit air. The black shadow straightened up and retreated. It claimed on the shadowy horse and seemed to vanish across the lane into the darkness on the other side. Frodo breathed again. "Elves!" exclaimed Sam in a hoarse whisper. "Elves, sir!" He would have burst out of the trees and dashed off toward the voices if they had not pulled him back. "Yes, it is elves," said Frodo. "One can meet them sometimes in the woody end. They don't live in the Shire, but they wander into it in spring and autumn, out of their own lands away beyond the Tower Hills. I am thankful that they do. You did not see, but that Black Rider stopped just here and was actually crawling towards us when the song began. As soon as he heard the voices, he slipped away." "What about the elves?" said Sam, too excited to trouble about the rider. "Can't we go and see them?" "Listen, they are coming this way," said Frodo. "We only have to wait." The singing drew nearer. One clear voice rose now above the others. It was singing in the fair elven tongue, of which Frodo knew only a little, and the others knew nothing. Yet the sound, blending with the melody, seemed to shape itself into their thought, into words which they only partly understood. This was the song as Frodo heard it. Snow white, O lady clear, O queen beyond the western seas, O light to us that wander here amid the world of woven trees. Githoniel, O Iberith, clear are thy eyes and bright thy breath. Snow white, we sing to thee in a far land beyond the sea. O stars that in the sunless year with shining hand by her were sown, in windy fields now bright and clear we see your silver blossom blown. O Elbereth Githoniel, we still remember, we who dwell in this far land beneath the trees, the starlight on the western seas." The song ended. "These are high elves. They spoke in the name of Elbereth," said Frodo in amazement. "Few of that fairest folk are ever seen in the Shire. Not many now remain in Middle-earth, east of the great sea. This is indeed a strange chance." The hobbits sat in shadow by the wayside. Before long the elves came down the lane toward the valley. They passed slowly, and the hobbits could see the starlight glimmering on their hair and in their eyes. They bore no lights, yet as they walked a shimmer like the light of the moon above the rim of the hills before it rises, seemed to fall about their face. They were now silent, and as the last elf passed, he turned and looked toward the hobbits and laughed. "Hail, Frodo!" he cried. "You are abroad late, or are you perhaps lost?" Then he called out aloud to the others, and all the company stopped and gathered around. "This is indeed wonderful," they said. "3 hobbits in a wood at night. We have not seen such a thing since Bilbo went away. What is the meaning of it?" "The meaning of it, fair people," said Frodo, "is simply that we seem to be going the same way as you are. I like walking under the stars, but I would welcome your company." But we have no need of other company, and hobbits are so dull, they laughed. And how do you know that we will go the same way as you, for you do not know whither we are going? And how do you know my name? Asked Frodo in return. We know many things, they said. We have seen you often before with Bilbo, though you may not have seen us. Who are you, and who is your lord? Asked Frodo. I am Gildor, answered the leader, the elf who had first hailed him, Gildor Inglorion of the house of Finrod. We are exiles, and most of our kindred have long ago departed, and we too are now only tarrying here a while, ere we return over the great sea. But some of our kinsfolk dwell still in peace in Rivendell. Come now, Frodo, tell us what you are doing, for we see that there is some shadow of fear upon you. Oh, wise people, interrupted Pippin eagerly, tell us about the Black Riders. Black Riders, they said in low voices. Why do you ask us about Black Riders? Because 2 Black Riders have overtaken us today, or one has done so twice, said Pippin. Only a little while ago he slipped away as you drew near. The elves did not answer at once, but spoke together softly in their own tongue. At length Gildor turned to the hobbits. We will not speak of this here, he said. We think you had best come with us now. It is not our custom, but for this time we will take you on our road, and you shall lodge with us tonight, if you will. Oh, fair folk, this is good fortune beyond my hopes, said Pippin. Sam was speechless. I thank you indeed, Gildor Inglorion. Said Frodo, bowing. Ellen Sila Lumion Amentielvo. A star shines in the hour of our meeting, he added in the high elven speech. Be careful, friends, cried Gildor, laughing. Speak no secrets. Here is a scholar of the ancient tongue. Bilbo was a good master. Hail, elf friend, he said, bowing to Frodo. Come now with your friends and join our company. You had best walk in the middle so that you may not stray. You may be weary before we halt. Why? Where are you going? Asked Frodo. For tonight, we go to the woods on the hills above Wood Hall. It is some miles, but you shall have rest at the end of it, and it will shorten your journey tomorrow. They now marched on again in silence, and passed like shadows and faint lights, for elves even more than hobbits could walk when they wished without sound or footfall. Pippin soon began to feel sleepy and staggered once or twice, but each time a tall elf at his side put out his arm and saved him from a fall. Sam walked along at Frodo's side as if in a dream, with an expression on his face half of fear and half of astonished joy. The woods on either side became denser, the trees were now younger and thicker, and as the lane went lower, running down into the fold of the hills, there were many deep breaks of hazel on the rising slopes at either hand. At last the elves turned aside from the path. A green ride lay almost unseen through the thickets on the right, and this they followed as it wound away back up the wooded slopes on to the top of the shoulder of the hills that stood out into the lower land of the river valley. Suddenly they came out of the shadow of the trees, and before them lay a wide space of grass, gray under the night. On 3 sides the woods pressed upon it, but eastward the ground fell steeply, and the tops of the dark trees growing at the bottom of the slope were below their feet. Beyond, the low lands lay dim and flat under the stars. Nearer at hand a few lights twinkled in the village of Wood Hall. The elves sat on the grass and spoke together in soft voices. They sensed to take no further notice of the hobbits. Frodo and his companions wrapped themselves in cloaks and blankets, and drowsiness stole over them. The night grew on, and the lights in the valley went out. Pippin fell asleep, pillowed on the green hillock. Away high in the east swung Rimarath, the netted stars, and slowly above the mists red Morgil rose, glowing like a jewel of fire. Then by some shift of airs all the mist was drawn away like a veil, and there leaned up, as he climbed over the rim of the world, the swordsman of the sky, Men-Elvagor, with his shining belt. The elves all burst into song. Suddenly, under the trees, a fire sprang up with a red light. "Come," the elves called to the hobbits. "Come, now is the time for speech and merriment." So this archer in the sky, was it an archer?
It was the swordsman.
Swordsman in the sky sounds a lot like a constellation that we all know. Orion? The idea is he's painting this world, but it's our world from a long lost age. And so that's kind of the idea of it.
It's not really true.
It's not really true, that's right. But it is true in their story. Okay. So, merriment. Pippin sat up and rubbed his eyes. He shivered. "There is fire in the hall, and food for hungry guests," said an elf standing before him. At the south end of the green sward there was an opening. There was a green floor ran on into the wood, and formed a wide space like a hall, roofed by the boughs of trees. Their great trunks ran like pillars down each side. In the middle there was a wood fire blazing, and upon the tree pillars torches with lights of gold and silver were burning steadily. The elves sat round the fire upon the grass or upon the sawn rings of old trunks. Some went to and fro, bearing cups and pouring drink. Others brought food on heaped plates and dishes. "This is poor fare," they said to the hobbits, "for we are lodging in the greenwood, far from our halls. If ever you are guests at home, we will treat you better." "It seems to me good enough for a birthday party," said Frodo. Pippin afterward recalled little of either food or drink, for his mind was filled with the light upon the elf faces, and the sound of voices so various and so beautiful that he felt in a waking dream. But he remembered that there was bread surpassing the savor of a fair white loaf to one who is starving, and fruit sweet as wild berries, and richer than the tended fruits of gardens. He drained a cup that was filled with a fragrant draught, cool as a clear fountain, golden as a summer afternoon. Sam could never describe in words, nor picture clearly to himself what he felt or thought that night, though it remained in his memory as one of the chief events of his life. The nearest he ever got was to say, "Well, sir, if I could grow apples like that, I would call myself a gardener." But it was the singing that went to my heart, if you know what I mean. Frodo sat eating, drinking, and talking with delight, but his mind was chiefly on the words spoken. He knew a little of the elf speech and listened eagerly. Now and again he spoke to those that served him and thanked them in their own language. They smiled at him and said, laughing, "Here is a jewel among hobbits." After a while Pippin fell fast asleep and was lifted up and borne away to a bower under the trees. There he was laid upon a soft bed and slept the rest of the night away. Sam refused to leave his master. When Pippin had gone, he came and sat curled up at Frodo's feet, where at last he nodded and closed his eyes. Frodo remained long awake, talking with Gildor. They spoke of many things, old and new, and Frodo questioned Gildor much about happenings in the wide world outside the Shire. The tidings were mostly sad and ominous, of gathering darkness, the wars of men, and the flight of the elves. At last Frodo asked the question that was the nearest to his heart. "Tell me, Gildor, have you ever seen Bilbo since he left us?" Gildor smiled. "Yes," he answered, "twice. He said farewell to us on this very spot, but I saw him once again, far from here." He would say no more about Bilbo, and Frodo fell silent. You do not ask me or tell me much that concerns yourself, Frodo," said Gildor, "but I already know a little, and I can read more in your face and in the thought behind your questions. You are leaving the Shire, and yet you doubt that you will find what you seek or accomplish what you intend, or that you will ever return. Is not that so?" "It is," said Frodo, "but I thought my going was a secret known only to Gandalf and my faithful Sam." He looked down at Sam, who was snoring gently. "The secret will not reach the enemy from us," said Gildor. "The enemy?" said Frodo. "Then you know why I am leaving the Shire." "I do not know for what reason the enemy is pursuing you," answered Gildor, "but I perceive that he is. Strange indeed that though that seems to me, and I warn you that peril is now both before you and behind you, and upon either side." "You mean the riders? I feared that they were servants of the enemy. What are the Black Riders? Has Gandalf told you nothing? Nothing about such creatures? Then I think it is not for me to say more, lest terror should keep you from your journey. For it seems to me that you have set out only just in time, if indeed you are in time. You must now make haste, and neither stay nor turn back, for the Shire is no longer any protection to you." "I cannot imagine what information could be more terrifying than your hints and warnings," exclaimed Frodo. "I knew that danger lay ahead, of course, but I did not expect to meet it in our own Shire. Can't a hobbit walk from the water to the river in peace?" "But it is not your own Shire," said Gildor. "Others dwelt here before hobbits were, and others will dwell here again when hobbits are no more. The wide world is all about you. You can fence yourselves in, but you cannot forever fence it out." "I know, and yet it has always seemed so safe and familiar. What can I do now? My plan was to leave the Shire secretly and make my way to Rivendell, but now my footsteps are dogged before ever I get to Buckland." "I think you should still follow that plan," said Gildor. "I do not think the road will prove too hard for your courage, but if you desire clearer counsel, you should ask Gandalf. I do not know the reason for your flight, and therefore I do not know by what means your pursuers will assail you. These things Gandalf must know. I suppose that you will see him before you leave the Shire?" "I hope so, but that is another thing that makes me anxious. I have been expecting Gandalf for many days. He was to have come to Hobbiton at the latest 2 nights ago, but he has never appeared. Now I am wondering what can have happened. Should I wait for him?" Gildor was silent for a moment. "I do not like this news," he said at last. "That Gandalf should be late does not bode well, but it is said. Do not meddle in the affairs of wizards, for they are subtle and quick to anger. The choice is yours, to go or wait." "And it is also said," answered Frodo, "go not to the elves for counsel, for they will say both no and yes." "Is it indeed?" laughed Gildor. "Elves seldom give unguarded advice, for advice is a dangerous gift, even from the wise to the wise, and all courses may run ill. But what would you? You have not told me all concerning yourself, and how then shall I choose better than you? But if you demand advice, I will, for friendship's sake, give it. I think you should go at once without delay, and if Gandalf does not come before you set out, then I also advise this: do not go alone. Take such friends as are trusty and willing. Now you should be grateful, for I do not give this counsel gladly. The elves have their own labors and their own sorrows, and they are little concerned with the ways of hobbits, or of any other creature upon earth. Our paths cross theirs seldom by chance or purpose. In this meeting there may be more than chance, but the purpose is not clear to me, and I fear to say too much." "I am deeply grateful," said Frodo, "but I wish you would tell me plainly what the Black Riders are. If I take your advice, I may not see Gandalf for a long while, and I ought to know what is the danger that pursues me." "If it is not enough to know that they are servants of the enemy," answered Gildor, "flee them. Speak no words to them. They are deadly. Ask no more of me, but my heart forebodes that ere all is ended, you, Frodo, son of Drogo, will know more of these fell things than Gildor in Glorion. May Elbereth protect you. But where shall I find courage? Asked Frodo. That is what I chiefly need. Courage is found in unlikely places, said Gildor. But be of good hope. Sleep now. In the morning we shall have gone, but we will send our messages through the lands. The wandering companies shall know of your journey, and those that have power for good shall be on the watch. I name you Elf-friend, and may the stars shine upon the end of your road. Seldom have we had such delight in strangers, and it is fair to hear words of the ancient speech from the lips of other wanderers in the world. Frodo felt sleep coming upon him, even as Gildor finished speaking. I will sleep now, he said, and the elf led him to a bower beside Pippin, and he threw himself upon a bed and fell at once into a dreamless slumber. And I just want to show you the picture. This was 1 page ago, so not too far. There is, I'm assuming that's Frodo talking to Gildor, and is that Sam in the picture too? Yeah, there's Sam and Pippin and some more elves also. So again, these pictures are by Alan Lee, and they are phenomenal pictures. So this is a very great edition of this book, and I'm very pleased to have been able to get it so that we can read this story together. I hope that you are enjoying the story, and I hope that Kimberly's enjoying the story, and that Mom is enjoying the story, and this little tyke's enjoying the story, and Daniel's enjoying the story, and I hope
know
that
you're enjoying the story.
this is my 4th time. I hope that you guys have a great night, and
hope our
we'll
dogs are
talk
enjoying
to
the
you. I don't think the dogs care. And we will talk to you later.